Do you know who lived on your lands before you? Now, I do not mean the previous tenants of your apartment or those who used to live in your house. What I am talking about is the culture that once inhabited the area that you now own. Not many Americans know the answer to this question, as the history of the indigenous cultures of North America have been overshadowed by whitewashed stories of colonialist movements. The true history of North America is filled with broken promises and genocides committed against the many Native American tribes that inhabited these lands long before any of us were born. However, in recent years, movements have begun across North America to help improve the lives of the indigenous communities and try to give back as much as possible. The Land Back movement has swept across all of North America, with the goal of demanding reparations to many Native Americans across the continent and normalize the conversations about Indigenous history. Today, I will discuss the major goals of the Land Back movement and how you can support them by researching what tribes' lands you live on, and the treaties the communities suffered from. So, this movement, it's not new. It has honestly been here in this country, and just in North America, since its founding, since we first kind of colonized this nation. However, it is only in the last few years that it has gained the attention that it truly deserves. The Land Back movement wants not only reparations for the damage done to their communities in the past, but also wish for decision-making powers to be transferred back to those nations. So, essentially, they want to be able to create laws, legislation, regarding their lands that they once took control of. As described in Belfie's article, What Does Land Restitution Mean and How Does It Relate to the Land Back Movement? How Does It Work in Practice? Which was last written in 2021, that this goal does not, quote, ask current residents to vacate their homes, but maintains that Indigenous governance is possible, sustainable, and preferred for public lands. The efforts of these groups also frame it as helping the environments due to nature and its protection being incredibly vital to the cultures of many of the First Nations. First Nations being the politically correct term for many indigenous groups. Recently, here in Virginia, indigenous communities were able to secure their own land for conservation purposes. In her opinion piece for the Washington Post titled Virginia Recognizes the Promise of Indigenous-Led Conservation, Ann Richardson, chief of the Rappahannock Tribe in Virginia, states that the partnership between the Rappahannock Tribe and the Chesapeake Conservancy is deeply rooted in a shared mission of land conservation. Many climate scientists and activists even state that indigenous communities should be at the center of these conversations going forward about biodiversity and environmental protection. Climate change is something that many indigenous communities have actually pushed for even more than the idea of the Land Back movement. But how can we, as general Americans, help the Land Back movement? Well, the movement itself proposes what seems like very small steps, but in reality will help everyone learn more about the true history of this country. For starters, you can do research into what tribes used to exist in your lands. There's many websites where you can learn which tribes settled in different regions or even different counties. It can lead you toward learning if those communities have reservations nearby and how you can support them. This can also lead you to do research on the many contracts and treaties that the colonizers and First Nations created that unfortunately hurt the First Nations much more than you would think. You'll be able to learn about the doctrine of discovery, a concept created by colonizers to justify their ability to take over the lands they found. It was essentially created in the 1400s, but then it ended up being taken by English colonizers that they created this idea that if you've discovered a land, you were able to take over it. You were allowed to explore it and conquer it. David Wilkins, the presidential professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota, in his article Deconstructing the Doctrine of Discovery, last updated in 2018, on the Indigenous-run news media website ICT, writes that the idea of the doctrine of discovery has, quote, been so misused to distort the perceptions of past and present oppression that it should be stricken from the federal government, for the federal government's political and legal vocabulary. End quote. Many books have been written on the topic of Indigenous history as well, such as An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. This is the Young People's Guide. This one is very good for younger students. Of course, there is a much more adult version. But why am I giving you what probably seems like homework? The journey toward a better America is a personal one. To truly change this country for better, we need to look at ourselves and our history as a whole and see what changes must be made in order to bring about a more peaceful world. Looking at our true history can make people like you and me feel very uncomfortable in our own skin because we're not used to hearing these bad things about who our cultures once were. But that is the most important feeling we need to feel in this journey of anti-racism, giving land back. Research as much as possible, and review the true history that lies deep beneath your own soil. Thank you.